Sociopathic tendencies can be a very dangerous thing if left unchecked. And when left unchecked, the person with these tendencies can cause a ripple effect and even lead to murder. For instance, here is an example of what happens when these tendencies lie within the heart of a narcissistic individual. Here is the case of Geraldine Parrish, a woman incapable of trust. Geraldine Brown Parrish was an American criminal and murderer. Between May 1985 and 1988, she hired two men, Edwin Gordon and Lionel Robinson, for a series of brutal insurance murders in Baltimore, Maryland. Parrish suffered from a superiority complex, as a result of which her relatives and close friends became victims of her crimes. In the late 1970s, Parrish began to show signs of a superiority complex and began to exhibit deviant behavior towards her friends and relatives. In the early 1980s, she developed a get-rich-quick scheme by receiving insurance benefits via life insurance policies. For this purpose, Parrish urged relatives, friends, and acquaintances to make life insurance policies that made her the only beneficiary in the event of an untimely death. In order to get said benefits, Parrish planned out several killings in the mid-1980s. Parrish was also said to practice voodoo magic, which explains another reason why her friends and relatives trusted her words. Some, on the other hand, found her mistrusting and was said to have feared her. Aside from her two hitmen, there was another who admired and looked up to her. This person was her niece by the name of Renee Burns. The first victim was 46-year-old Frank Lee Ross, an ex-husband of one of Parrish's sisters, who was shot dead on November 12, 1985. This murder was committed by 20-year-old Edwin Bernardo Gordon, whom Parrish paid more than $2,000 to commit the killing. On October 6, 1986, Albert Robinson and Parrish's brother Ronald Brown were killed by Lionel Robinson, no relation. And on March 6, 1987, 65-year-old Helen Wright, Parrish's housekeeper, was killed. After her death, Parrish received more than $10,000 from life insurance and Social Security checks. This murder was also committed by Gordon, who also received a reward of $2,000. It is said that Geraldine invited these victims out for a good time and constantly supplied them with alcohol, in which case would result in their untimely demise. During these times, she'd convince her victims to take out the life insurance policies, and considering the alcohol consumed, it made her job easy. 6 months later, Parrish arranged a plan to kill her niece, 29-year-old Dolly Brown, for whom Parrish was the beneficiary of an insurance policy worth more than $10,000. On September 19, 1987, Edwin attacked Brown and her husband, 37-year-old Ronald Mitcher, during which Mitcher was shot dead. Dolly herself was then shot 4 times in the head. However, miraculously, she survived. But after her recovery, she didn't say a word to the police regarding the murderer, even though she knew who put the hit out on her. Later on, a person who wished to remain anonymous contacted the police to inform them regarding the murders. The individual gave the police one of the biggest leads, informing them that Edwin was a hitman for Parrish. After the individual's information, the police went after Edwin after the unsuccessful attempt to kill Dolly Brown in May 1988. Edwin Gordon was arrested and soon began cooperating with investigators. He told them that Parrish had orchestrated everything, and she was arrested later that summer. Gordon was charged with 3 murders, 4 counts of assault and conspiracy to murder, while Geraldine was charged with conspiracy to murder and contract killing. Subsequently, Parrish was suspected of committing several more murders after it became clear that 77-year-old Rayfield Gilliard died in February 1988, 15 days after marrying her. He had left his home, money, and social benefits amounting to $440 per month in a life insurance policy, which Geraldine began receiving a month after his death. The death certificate stated that Gilliard had died from a cardiovascular disease, but there was no record in his medical history that he ever had any heart problems. During the interrogation, Geraldine tried to act as an insane person to avoid a trial. However, that didn't fool the detectives in the slightest. When Parrish saw Plan A go out the window, she resorted to use Plan B, which was to try and charm the detectives. That plan fell flat on its face as well, as the detectives simply slapped the cuffs on her and took her away. Parrish's trial began in early 1989. In May, she and Edwin Gordon pleaded guilty to organizing and committing 4 murders between November 1985 to May 1988 in order to receive insurance benefits in the amount of $39,000. They were also found guilty of assaulting 3 more people. After the conviction, Parrish received 8 terms of life imprisonment with no chance of parole. Her accomplice was also given several life imprisonment terms. Regarding this series of murders, it makes me realize something. Be careful whom you trust, especially when money is involved, even if it's family. Thank you, Geraldine, for that valuable lesson. And speaking of Geraldine Parrish, well, after her conviction, Parrish was sent to the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women to serve her sentence. Parrish died in custody of natural causes in 2004. Here's to hoping she's burning in hell as we speak. Serial killers come in all flavors. Some are men, some are women, some are old, some are young, and some come in the form of merchants. Today we're going to cover the case of Leonarda Cianciulli, a middle-aged madwoman also known as the soap maker of Correggio. Leonarda Cianciulli was born in Montella, Avellino, in what was then the Kingdom of Italy. She attempted suicide twice in her youth. In 1917, Cianciulli married a registry office clerk, Raffaele Pansardi. Her mother did not approve of the marriage, as she had planned to marry her to another man. Cianciulli later claimed that on this occasion her mother had cursed them. In 1921, the couple moved to Pansardi's native town of Lauria, Potenza, where Cianciulli was sentenced and imprisoned for fraud in 1927. When released, the couple moved to Lacedonia, Avellino. After their home was destroyed in the 1930 Irpinia earthquake, they moved once more to Correggio, Reggio Emilia, where Cianciulli opened a small shop. It is around this point where Leonarda Cianciulli began to unravel. She had 17 pregnancies during her marriage, but lost 3 of the children to miscarriage. 10 more died in their youth. Consequently, Cianciulli was heavily protective of the 4 surviving children. Her fears were fueled by a warning she had received some time earlier from a fortune teller who said that she would marry and have children, but that all of the children would die young. Reportedly, Cianciulli also visited a Romani who practiced palm reading and who told her, "In your right hand I see prison, in your left a criminal asylum." In 1939, Cianciulli learned that her eldest son and favorite child, Giuseppe, was going to join the Royal Italian Army in preparation for the Second World War. She was determined to protect him at all costs and came to the conclusion that his safety required human sacrifices. Cianciulli found her victims in 3 middle-aged women, all neighbors. The first of Cianciulli's victims was a woman named Faustina Setti, a lifelong spinster who had come to her for help in finding a husband. Cianciulli told her of a suitable partner in Pola, but asked her to tell no one of the news. She also persuaded Setti to write letters and postcards to relatives and friends. They were to be mailed when she reached Pola to tell them that everything was fine. Preparing for her departure, Setti came to visit Cianciulli one last time. Cianciulli killed her with an axe and dragged the body into a closet where she cut it into 9 parts, gathering the blood into a basin. According to sources, some say Leonarda also stole Setti's life savings, which is a sum of $30,000 as payment for her services. Francesca Soavi was the second victim. Cianciulli claimed to have found her a job at a school for girls in Piacenza. Like with Seti, Cianciulli persuaded her to write postcards to be sent to friends, this time from Correggio, detailing her plans. Also, like Seti, Soavi came to visit Cianciulli before her departure. Cianciulli's third and final victim was the widow Virginia Cacioppo, a former soprano said to have sung at La Scala. For her, Cianciulli claimed to have found work as the secretary for a mysterious impresario in Florence. As with the other two women, Cianciulli instructed her not to tell a single person where she was going. Cacioppo agreed, and on September 30th, 1940, came for a last visit to Cianciulli. The pattern of the murder was the same as the first two. However, unlike the first two victims, Cianciulli melted the body to make soap. In the third murder, Leonarda will go on to make a huge mistake that will cost her. You see, Cacioppo was not alone. Her sister-in-law, Albertina Fanti, had been outside waiting for her return. She got suspicious, so she knocked on the door to see what the holdup was. Leonarda went on to tell her no one ever came inside. But Fanti knew that was a lie, considering she saw her sister-in-law go inside with her own eyes. Even though Leonarda invited her inside to see for herself, she knew something was wrong. Fanti contacted the police, and upon the police arrival, they discovered an Italian horror story. Cianciulli did not confess to the murders until their suspicion fell on her son, Giuseppe Pansardi. She then provided detailed accounts of what she had done to absolve her son from any blame. Cianciulli was tried for murder in Reggio Emilia in 1946. She remained unrepentant, going so far as to correct the official account while on the stand, and made statements willingly, gladly describing the where, when, how, and why she committed the murders at her trial in Reggio Emilia. Poetess Leonarda gripped the witness stand rail with oddly delicate hands and calmly set the prosecutor right on certain details. Her deep-set dark eyes gleamed with a wild inner pride as she concluded, "I gave the copper ladle, which I used to skim the fat off the kettles, to my country, which was so badly in need of metal during the last days of the war." Cianciulli made a statement describing Cacioppo's murder and, quote, "She ended up in the pot like the other two. Her flesh was fat and white. When it had melted, I added a bottle of cologne, and after a long time on the boil, I was able to make some most acceptable creamy soap. I gave bars to neighbors and acquaintances. The cakes, too, were better. That woman was really sweet." From Cacioppo, Cianciulli reportedly received 50,000 lire, assorted jewels, and public bonds. She even sold all the victims' clothing and shoes. Cianciulli later made a statement describing what she did to Seti and, quote, "I threw the pieces into a pot, added 7 kilos of caustic soda, which I had bought to make soap, and stirred the mixture until the pieces dissolved in a thick, dark mush that I poured into several buckets and emptied in a nearby septic tank. As for the blood in the basin, I waited until it had coagulated, dried it in the oven, ground it, and mixed it with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, and eggs, as well as a bit of margarine, kneading all the ingredients together. I made lots of crunchy tea cakes and served them to the ladies who came to visit, though Giuseppe and I also ate them." Cianciulli was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a criminal asylum. In that asylum, she wrote a book describing the murders in cold detail. She died of cerebral apoplexy in the women's criminal asylum in Pozzuoli in October of 1970. A number of artifacts from the case, including the pot in which the victims were boiled, are on display at the Criminological Museum in Rome. Later on, a darkly comic play about Cianciulli called Love and Magic in Mama's Kitchen was created. It was produced by Lena Wertmüller at the Spoleto Festival in 1979. The play began a run on Broadway in 1983. This goes to show you, no matter how innocent someone may look, you can never judge a book by its cover. Entitlement is one of the traits in humanity that can lead to dangerous roads, and in this case it happened to be just that. This is the case of Jamila Mubarak, an entitled no-life who felt the need to commit murder. Without further ado, let's get on with it. She was one of 7 children born in Pas-de-Calais, France, to immigrant parents, a Tunisian mother and a Moroccan father. The children were abused by their violent and alcoholic father, who worked as a miner. When Jamila Mubarak was 6 years old, her mother fled with her and her 6 siblings to Naboul, Tunisia, in order to escape from their abusive father. Mubarak spent most of her childhood there. Mubarak moved to Switzerland in her early 20s and then to Paris, where she has claimed she studied acting. At the age of 17, Mubarak moved to Saint-Tropez, where she married her first husband, Dutch businessman Ralph Schouten, by whom she had 2 children. The first marriage ended in divorce in the early 2000s. According to her ex-husband, Ralph Schouten, Mubarak often went by the name Sarah, and her children knew her by that name. Schouten believes Mubarak worked as a prostitute even during their short, unhappy marriage. She rarely saw her children, who in 2006 lived on the French Riviera with their paternal grandmother. In 1993, Mubarak posed nude in Playboy magazine. She later worked for an escort agency on the French Riviera and was looking for a permanent arrangement with one of her wealthy clients after her recent divorce when, under the name Sarah, she met the twice-divorced Anthony Ashley Cooper, 10th Earl of Shaftesbury, in late 2001. Catherine Gertler, a former madam from Paris who sent Mubarak to Lord Shaftesbury, later testified that she had asked for rich clients, and she saw plenty of big-name celebrities during her days working for the agency. According to Gertler, she hoped to settle down with an affluent and famous man. Mubarak and Lord Shaftesbury were married at Hilversum in the Netherlands. The wedding was first scheduled for spring 2002, but Shaftesbury felt something was not right. To the disappointment of his family, he became infatuated with Mubarak, buying her a flat in Cannes and transferring other properties into her name after they married. Mubarak, by this point titled Countess of Shaftesbury, claimed to be pregnant with his child. Shaftesbury included her in his will, naming her the heir of his properties in Ireland and France, but a child was never born to the couple. During her trial, she claimed that she had had an abortion due to Shaftesbury's alcoholism, but the magistrate said that the pregnancy had never occurred. By April 2004, Lord Shaftesbury had started a new relationship with Nadia Ork, a young mother of 2 children who has been described as a club hostess from Cannes and a Moroccan prostitute. According to Ork, Lord Shaftesbury was planning to marry her after getting a divorce from his 3rd wife. Lord and Lady Shaftesbury separated in April 2004, and divorce proceedings were set in motion. By that time, he had given her a windmill in the Gers region of southwestern France, the duplex in a villa in Cannes, which included staff, a car, and a monthly allowance. Lord Shaftesbury wanted to end this arrangement and the marriage so he could marry Orch. While Shaftesbury was speaking with his wife, a fight broke out between him and his brother-in-law, Mohammed Mubarak. Shaftesbury died during the fight when his brother-in-law strangled him, breaking his neck. Mubarak arranged this murder. Due to getting her allowance cut off, she made a deal with her brother to kill her husband and agreed to pay a large sum in return. People who knew the Earl began to wonder when he stopped reporting in. The police were notified and were sent to his estate to do a checkup, and upon discovery, a brutal murder was uncovered. Jamila Mubarak became the immediate suspect due to the constant fighting between her and the Earl. Witnesses notified the police and informed them of the divorce and violent outburst from Mubarak. Furthermore, she was the last person to see him alive. The investigators happened upon the Earl's finances and noticed a large sum of money being transferred from his account to another unknown account. After tracing the source, the investigators were able to link the account to Mubarak. At the time, she began to break down. In February 2005, Lady Shaftesbury was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where she had an emotional breakdown and began confessing to her involvement in her husband's death. When interviewed by police, she claimed that Shaftesbury had been beaten to death by her brother during a fight at her flat in Cannes. According to Lady Shaftesbury, her brother placed her husband's body in the boot of his BMW and left it in an unknown place. She was arrested and her brother was arrested by German police the following at his home in Munich. He was later extradited to France, continuing to deny his involvement and knowledge of the location of Lord Shaftesbury's body. In June 2006, pre-trial proceedings began in Grasse. Lady Shaftesbury told the court that she was not with her brother when he disposed of the body. She stated that she had never been to the site and claimed that she had no role in the murder other than helping her brother, under duress, load the body into his car. She told investigators, "I did not want him to die. I just wanted my brother to intimidate him so that he would continue to pay me my allowance. But he didn't want to have anything to do with it, so a violent quarrel broke out. I left the room because I could not stand to see what was happening." However, based on the evidence of her transferring money to her brother, as well as admitting to assist her brother in moving the body, as well as the findings of investigators, no one believed her statement. All it looked like to investigators was she and her brother killed the Earl somewhere else and moved the body to another location. Some also say her breakdown and being admitted was also staged to look innocent in the eyes of the courts. In May 2007, the trial of Jamila, Countess of Shaftesbury, and her brother, Mohammed Mubarak, opened at the Palais de Justice in Nice, 2.5 years after the death of the 10th Earl of Shaftesbury. The presiding judge of the jury trial was Nicole Besset, with Jean-Louis Moreau serving as the state prosecutor. The Countess of Shaftesbury was represented in court by her attorney, Frank de Vita. A forensic examination of the skeletal remains revealed injuries, including a broken ankle and a double fracture to the larynx, which indicated strangulation. At times, both Lady Shaftesbury and her brother had admitted their involvement in the death of Lord Shaftesbury, and the French authorities decided to charge both her and her brother with the crime of premeditated murder. Fearing that her Arab ancestry might alienate the jury, the defendant demanded to be referred to by the titles she had gained when she married Shaftesbury, much to the dismay of his family. I find it astonishing that she'd try and think of something to keep her image intact, considering she's on trial. Honestly, I'll never understand the mind of a narcissistic killer. Nevertheless, according to the magistrate's investigative report, the trial began with a presentation of the investigative report, which was read to the court by Jean-Louis Moreau, the state prosecutor. The report described Lady Shaftesbury as an escort girl who loved the high life, who chose the life of a kept woman, with multiple affairs with men she chose for their bank accounts and their assets. After marrying Lord Shaftesbury, she faced looming financial disaster in the event of a divorce and set out consciously and without constraint to accomplish his assassination. Refusing to be dissuaded from her desired inheritance, she continued to maintain her belief throughout the trial that she was entitled to a share of her late husband's $6 million fortune, including the family estate at Wimborne St. Giles. And this is why I find it astonishing. Even though she's on trial for murder, she'd still stake claim to someone else's fortune. Whatever the case, Lady Shaftesbury discounted the investigative report and stated that her marriage to Lord Shaftesbury was a curse, describing her husband as a loner who had no friends, which is why he drank a lot. She portrayed him as a violent, sex-crazed alcoholic hooked on cocaine. She freely admitted that her brother had indeed killed her husband, but testified it was an accident. Her brother presented a similar defense. She further admitted that after her husband was dead, she helped her brother load his body into the trunk of his black BMW. She prefaced this admission with additional claims. "He forced me to put the body in the boot of the car. He forced me to follow him as I thought we were going to a hospital. Then he asked me to go away." The French authorities suspected there had been a conspiracy to murder Shaftesbury when they discovered that his widow transferred $150,000 into her brother's bank account the week following her husband's disappearance. The prosecution viewed this as payment for services rendered, although Lady Shaftesbury testified that she had given her brother the money in order for him to buy a house for their ailing mother. In her defense, she denied any financial motive in wishing her husband dead and claimed that she had no need of his fortune, stating that she had always been prosperous. She testified that the source of her prosperity was the generosity of wealthy individuals who were prepared to pay for her company. Lady Shaftesbury, who claimed to be extremely close to Prince Albert II of Monaco, named 2 American actors, George Clooney and Bruce Willis, as well as Swedish former tennis player Bjorn Borg, as her former clients. All 3 men denied meeting her and declined to attend court to comment on her allegations or serve as character witnesses. Lady Shaftesbury vowed revenge, additionally stating, "I was always loyal to the men who were close to me, but they did not want to know me when I was facing the biggest trial of my life. Most were too scared to appear because they are married or have steady girlfriends, but with their help I could have been cleared." Lady Shaftesbury added that her arguments with her husband had nothing to do with money, but rather arose as a result of his excessive sexual demands, reportedly brought on by injections of testosterone. Throughout the trial, her lawyer, Frank De Vita, continued to declare her innocence. "I am convinced Jamila will walk free." The strongest evidence presented by the prosecution was a secretly recorded telephone conversation between the defendant and her sister, Naima, in which Jamila discussed $150,000 paid to her brother, allegedly his fee for contract killing. She additionally recounted precisely how she was going to blame her brother for her husband's death. The wiretap uncovered the truth regarding her visit to the remote spot where her husband's body was found. This was supported when downloaded records from the GPS tracking device in her cell phone detailed the presence of her cell phone there, 2 days before Lord Shaftesbury's death. In May 2007, after deliberating for 2 hours, the jury returned guilty verdicts against both brother and sister. Lady Shaftesbury and her brother were each sentenced to 25 years in prison. Under French law, they had an automatic right to appeal their conviction, which results in a retrial of the case. Lady Shaftesbury appeared in court on February 2009, appeared to appeal her conviction. After the jury deliberated for 4 hours, her sentence was reduced from 25 to 20 years. I honestly would have locked her up and tossed the key in the drainage ditch. Anyway, she is currently serving her time as we speak, and I am glad she can't use a cent of that money. Now enjoy the prison food. I hear they make the worst danishes. Looks can be deceiving, which is why it is important to be mindful to who you share your life or information with. I'm going to be covering a woman named Juana Barraza, which is one of the most mind-blowing documentaries that I've ever explored. And without further ado, let's jump into it. In 1990, the streets of Mexico City became more dangerous than usual. A serial killer had been targeting 60-year-old women. Juana Barraza was in her 60s, which also made her a target. However, she was not worried in the least. Juana Barraza was a wrestler, and a very good one, which is one of the reasons she had no reason to fear this killer. In the wrestling ring, she went by the name the Silent Lady. She wore a mask covering her face when she wrestled. Little did anyone know, behind the mask was a dark secret. She didn't fear the killer, because she was in fact the killer. The police suspected the killer to be a strong man. Never did they think the killer being an older woman in her 60s. Aside from wrestling at night, she was the mother of 4 kids by day, showing a gentle side to her children. Little did they know their mother had a dark secret and a very troubled past. Juana Barraza Samperio was born in Epazoyucan, Hidalgo, a rural area north of Mexico City. Barraza's mother, Justa Samperio, was an alcoholic who reportedly exchanged her for 3 beers to a man who repeatedly raped her in his care, and by whom she became pregnant with a son. Her son died from injuries sustained in a mugging. Barraza became even more troubled, and during this time she began to blame her mother for the way her life turned out. She was also unable to confront her mother or take her frustration out on her because her mother was no longer amongst the living. Unable to confront the woman who she believed ruined her life, she targeted older women resembling her. All of Barraza's victims were women aged 60 or over, many of whom lived alone. Barraza bludgeoned or strangled them before robbing them. Bernardo Batiz, the chief prosecutor in Mexico City, initially profiled the killer as having a brilliant mind, being quite clever and careful, and suggested that the killer probably struck after gaining the trust of the intended victim. Investigating officers suspected that the killer posed as a government official, offering victims the chance to sign up for welfare programs. The search for Barraza was complicated by conflicting evidence. At one point, the police hypothesized that 2 killers might be involved. An odd coincidence also distracted the investigation. At least 3 of Barraza's victims owned a print of an 18th century painting by French artist Jean-Baptiste Greuze, Boy in a Red Waistcoat. The authorities believed that Juana Barraza was a psychopath who felt no remorse. Furthermore, Barraza associated her elderly victims with her mother and believed that she was helping society by killing them. In order to gain the trust of her victims, Barraza posed as a government official who worked in social welfare. The authorities were heavily criticized by the media for dismissing evidence that a serial killer was at work in Mexico City as merely media sensationalism as late as the summer of 2005. Soon after setting an investigation in motion, the police incurred further criticism by launching what one journalist described as a ham-fisted and unproductive swoop on Mexico City's transvestite prostitutes. By November 2005, the Mexican authorities were reporting witness statements to the effect that the killer wore women's clothing to gain access to the victims' apartments. In one case, a large woman in a red blouse was seen leaving the home of a murdered woman. 2 months later, police began checking the fingerprints of bodies in the city's morgues in the apparent belief that Mataviejitas might have committed suicide. A major breakthrough in the case occurred in January 2006 when a suspect was arrested fleeing from the home of the serial killer's latest victim, Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro, who lived in the Venustiano Carranza borough of Mexico City. Alfaro, 82, had been strangled with a stethoscope. To the surprise of many Mexicans who had supposed the killer to be male, the suspect detained was Juana Barraza, a female wrestler known professionally as the Silent Lady. Witnesses at previous murder scenes had described a masculine-looking woman, and police had previously looked for a transgender person, although they later admitted that the former wrestler resembled composite images of the suspect. Barraza closely resembled a model of the killer's features, which showed La Mataviejitas with close-cropped hair dyed blonde and a facial mole, and was carrying a stethoscope, pension forms, and a card identifying her as a social worker when she was detained. Mexico City prosecutors said fingerprint evidence linked Barraza to at least 10 murders of the as many as 40 murders attributed to the killer. The wrestler is said to have confessed to murdering Alfaro and 3 other women, but denied involvement in all other killings. She told reporters that she strangled Alfaro after a dispute over pay for Barraza's maid services. Barraza was tried in the spring of 2008, the prosecution alleging she had been responsible for as many as 40 deaths. She admitted to one murder, that of Alfaro, and told the police her motive was lingering resentment regarding her own mother's treatment of her. In March, she was found guilty on 16 charges of murder and aggravated burglary, including 11 separate counts of murder. She was sentenced to 759 years in prison. Since sentences imposed in Mexican courts are generally served concurrently, but the maximum sentence under Mexican law is 60 years, she will most likely serve the full sentence in prison. While in prison, Juana Barraza has been working as a gym instructor and selling tacos to support her family. According to news reports, Juana also got married and divorced while serving her sentence. Honestly, I think the people she married while incarcerated are nuts. I wouldn't touch her with a 10-foot pole, and I also wouldn't eat a single damn taco made from her. Even though she strangled or beat someone to death, I wouldn't put it past her that she might poison someone. She was given 1 billion sentences for her crimes, so naturally, it would be fair to treat her as a human? Hell no. I get she has a horrible upbringing, but her victims shouldn't have to pay the price. I think wrestling could have been a good anger release, but I guess it wasn't enough. Later on, she was portrayed in a TV series called Mujer, Casos de la Vida Real in the early 2000s. Mexican producer Pedro Torres brought the story to television on an episode of the 2010 Mexican television series Mujeres Asesinas 3 that was produced by Televisa and Univision. The episode is called Maggie Pensionada, starring the Mexican actress Leticia Perdigon as Maggie and Irma Lozano, Ana Luisa Pelufo, and Lourdes Canle as victims. Barraza was highlighted in the documentary Instinto Asesino, which aired on Discovery en Español in 2010. The episode was entitled La Mataviejitas. Juana Barraza was also highlighted on the show La Historia Detrás del Mito. The episode was also entitled La Mataviejitas. Juana Barraza was featured on the 478th episode of The Last Podcast on the Left. The case was the subject of a 2023 documentary film, The Lady of Silence, The Mataviejitas Murders, on Netflix. Some sources gave the film mixed reviews, with Decider saying it offers the best and worst of the true crime doc genre and is occasionally lascivious, having some fat to be trimmed, and ultimately saying it too frequently reeks of crass exploitation and recommending its readers to skip it. Decider particularly took issue with footage of Barraza using a necktie and a member of her legal team posing as a pretended victim to demonstrate how she committed the stranglings, saying the footage is beyond gruesome, not to mention tasteless, and reeks of lionization and morbid fascination. However, Rolling Stone said the film transcends its subgenre and walks a fine line between observing the serious and pointing out the ridiculous, and concluding that it may be the year's best true crime doc. It's so ironic. She was a loser at life, in my opinion, with the opportunity to be a great wrestler, but now she's more famous than she ever was as a wrestler. Hello everyone. As a bonus to the previous video, I'm going to share another case that I've recently read. The documentary was short, but I found it very interesting. Well, the twist of fate in particular. This is the case of a greedy old bat named Rowena Ledbetter. Let's get to it. Rowena Ledbetter was a 70-year-old nurse from Waco, Texas, who married 7 times. She met a man named Herman Wilson. She later claimed to have fell in love with Herman. However, Herman's family, mainly his nieces, had their doubts. None of them trusted Rowena and felt she was after his money. Upon doing some digging on Rowena, they discovered the divorces ended tragically. Not too long after that, Herman himself had a stroke and was sent to the hospital. The doctors treated his stroke as old age. Soon after that, Rowena claiming to be concerned for his well-being. She had him add her to his will. I honestly don't see how that's caring for him, but nevertheless, she was added to the will. Afterwards, Herman makes a full recovery, but his nieces were still concerned. They tried to warn Herman, believing she was the reason why he fell ill. Furthermore, Rowena was found to be holding more deadly secrets. Not only did her late husbands die, she was still married to husband number 7. Herman never wavered. He figured at her age, she's about to have skeletons. Alarms went off once more once the family witnessed Rowena reading the will from cover to cover to ensure her name was in the will intact. 48 hours after her name was added into the will, she came over for breakfast and made Herman biscuits and gravy. Herman immediately fell to the ground choking after eating the meal. Herman finally realized what his nieces tried to warn him about was real. On his way to the hospital, he mustered up his strength to tell the paramedic he was poisoned by Rowena. Sadly, those were his last words. He died shortly after. A police investigation was conducted, and upon discovery, they discovered huge amounts of pesticide used to kill scorpions and fire ants. Even more then, that she had a backup plan just in case Herman survived the biscuits. She also laced his medication with poison and left a trail of evidence behind her. She was arrested upon discovery. In 2003, Rowena was found guilty of first-degree murder. However, the story doesn't end there. Now this is some funny shit. Rowena died a horrible death in her jail cell. The cause of death? She choked on a dinner roll and died slowly according to reports. Poetic justice? I say yes. I hope she's still choking all the way to hell. Humanity can be unpredictable. When we are at our best, it can be refreshing as long as it's a positive standpoint. However, humanity also comes with a very terrifying side. Sometimes when things are bad, it's real bad, and the good can come at one hell of a price. Today, I'm going to cover a maniac who committed an atrocious crime. This is the case of one Mark Barton. On July 29, 1999, a shooting spree occurred at two Atlanta area day trading firms, Momentum Securities and the All-Tech Investment Group. 9 people were killed and 13 other people were injured. This one is just sad. I have no real clue what went wrong here. His employers did indeed love him. He was even given the name the Rocket. It seems like a switch flipped and he lost his mind. On the surface, his life seemed fine. He had a wife and kids. However, before he even went on his killing spree, he started his work early. He killed his wife and kids with a hammer. They never got a chance to get out of bed. A very tragic end to a beautiful family. Barton's family moved to Alabama as his employer required him there. Barton grew paranoid and started distrusting his wife. He lost his employment after his performance plummeted. He was also caught sabotaging data of the company that had fired him and served a short jail term for this retaliatory act. Barton found a new employer in Georgia and a mistress in one of his wife's acquaintances with whom he had an affair. Spivey and her mother Eloise were killed by bludgeoning. Barton was the prime suspect in the double homicide, but he was not charged due to a lack of evidence. He always denied having had any part in them, including in the note that he would leave behind with the bodies of Lee Ann Vandiver and his children in 1999. Despite his denials, authorities still consider Barton a suspect in the 1993 murders. Barton had received a $294,000 insurance settlement from his first wife's death and used the funds to finance his day trading career, preferring high-risk internet-related stocks. He married Vandiver, his former mistress, in 1995. His mental health continued to deteriorate, however, and he began to suffer from both severe depression and paranoid delusions. In the month prior to his killing spree, Barton had lost $105,000, and Momentum Securities had canceled his account. Barton went to the offices of his former employer, Momentum Securities, in Atlanta. Witnesses say that Barton briefly chatted with co-workers and said, "I hope this doesn't ruin your trading day," before suddenly pulling out 2 pistols and opening fire. He shot and killed 4 people and attempted to execute Brad Showmail, who was shot 3 times at point-blank range. Barton then walked to the nearby All-Tech Investment Group building, where he lured Brent Doonan and Scott Manspeaker, his former bosses, into a private room with assistant Kathy Camp, telling them, "I've got something you're going to want to see." He opened fire, wounding all 3, with Doonan being shot 5 times and Camp being left blind. He then left the private room and murdered an additional 5 victims. Barton left the scene before police could arrive. He had fired a combined total of 39 shots at the 2 locations. The police searched his house and found the bodies of his family and the notes that he had left with them. in which Barton vehemently denied responsibility for the deaths of his first wife and mother-in-law. An intense manhunt ensued. 4 hours after the Alltech Investment Group shooting, Barton accosted and threatened a young girl in Kennesaw, apparently attempting to secure a hostage for his escape. The young girl escaped and called police. By shooting up both locations, it confused the police dispatch. The dispatcher received calls, however, initially they were believing people were panicking and giving the wrong name of the company. Several officers were dispatched to both locations and found that Barton had been at both locations. When police went to search for Barton, they raided his home. That's when the discovery of his family was made, as well as the note he left. From what it sounds like, he had already planned this event. The note stated, "I killed Leanne because she was one of the main reasons for my demise. I know that Jehovah will take care of all of them in the next life. I'm sure the details don't matter. There is no excuse, no good reason I am sure no one will understand. If they could, I wouldn't want them to. I just write these things to say why. Please know that I love Leanne, Matthew, and Michelle with all my heart. If Jehovah's willing, I would like to see them all again in the resurrection to have a second chance. I don't plan to live very much longer, just long enough to kill as many of the people that greedily sought my destruction." The police finally managed to catch up to Barton. He was spotted in his minivan, and this is one of the things I despise most. You see, when law enforcement attempted to apprehend him, Barton shot and killed himself and was unable to face real justice. Either way, I say good riddance to a maniac. I'm sure the families could care less of your stress and reasoning, considering innocent people were wounded or killed. Many people took a ripple effect behind this pointless shooting, and there's no explaining this shit to the families for taking away the lives of their loved ones. So burn in hell, Mark Barton. The sauna gets hot and there's no air conditioning unit there, but there's no day trading there, so you don't have to worry about being a loser in hell like you were at life. Some killers become killers due to lack of affection. Some become killers because they stopped getting their way. Whatever the reason, most killers are born based on their own self-absorbed thinking. I'm going to cover a woman by the name of Esti Carranza, who wanted to start a family and stopped at nothing to get it. Without further ado, let's get on with it. According to sources, Esti Carranza had always wanted to start a family. However, her mother would tell her to focus a career first, which had always been the opposite of what she wanted. However, she did in fact get a degree, but she did not use it. Instead, in 2005, she moved to Vienna, Austria to start an ice cream parlor. Starting an ice cream parlor was another way to interact with children. However, that eventually wasn't enough. Esti wanted a family of her own. She met a man named Holger Holtz. The two got married, and at that point, she began to work on starting a family. Esti was so eager to start a family. I say this because she and Holger married 2 to 3 weeks after meeting each other. She didn't know much about him, and vice versa. And during this time, the husband began to have second thoughts, while Esti herself wanted to have multiple children with a guy that she didn't know well. She probably didn't even know his middle or last name. Nevertheless, Esti was still determined to start her dream of starting a family. Later, things began to change for Holger. He became a devotee of Hare Krishna. Due to this, Esti started to have competition, and she began to notice his attention being elsewhere more and more. Not just that. The idea of starting a family started to waver in Holger's mind. Esti would often ask him about the said family and when can they start, but his replies would get simpler and simpler. There was no date in his head, so when she'd ask, he'd just say, "Soon." Esti would try anything she could to entice him. She'd wear stiletto heels, lingerie, and she'd try other things. But Holger wouldn't take the bait. It got to a point where Esti began to grow impatient, and soon resentment started to build. Arguments would occur. The two would be heard screaming at each other from the top of their lungs. Holger began to isolate himself from Esti, and the two would be on non-speaking terms. She later tried to win him back and asked him how would we ever start a family if there's no communication, or if he's always leaving or isolating himself. Holger would just give her the same reply by saying, soon. It began to dawn on Esti that maybe she married the wrong guy. I honestly don't understand why critical thinking was needed here. You two met and married 2 to 3 weeks after, so I don't understand why that's such breaking Channel 11 news to her. In my opinion, that's not enough time to get to know someone. But anyway, later, Esti started to have an affair with a salesman named Manfred Hinterberger. The two of them would seem intimate in the ice cream shop. However, Esti did not care who seen the two of them together and if it got back to her husband, because as I said, she was looking for a suitor. And so far, she hasn't given any real thinking to her decision-making, considering she married a guy by using instant transmission. Manfred convinced her she could have the life she wanted, and due to the lack of critical thinking, Esti fell victim to those words after just meeting her second suitor, even though she was still married to Holger. Patience is definitely not a virtue here. Now, during this time, she and Holger eventually began to head to divorce, but they still lived under the same roof. Esti planned to move with Manfred once the divorce was finalized, and then the two were planning to get married. However, even her foolproof master plan of marrying Manfred and having babies didn't go as planned. He left her, and was also later seen with another woman. Feeling embarrassed, she, for some reason, tried to run back to Holger. However, she did not get the sympathy she was expecting to get. He apparently said things like, "Well, it looks like you're going to be lonely and childless." According to sources, he'd say all sorts of mean things to her, and he belittled her in every way possible. He eventually pushed Esti over the edge with the insults. For some dumb reason, Holger thought it was a brilliant idea to leave his .45 pistols sitting on the counter. That mistake would cost him dearly. Esti grabbed the gun, and as he was playing video games on his computer, she pointed the gun to the back of his cranium and pulled the trigger twice. And as he slumped over his computer board, she walked up and put another bullet in his head for good measure. The defile didn't stop there. She cut him up. According to sources, she had to stop and take breaks and get back to work, dicing him up. And once she was done, she stuffed his parts in ice cream buckets. She first tried to set his body on fire, but that plan didn't work. Neighbors who caught the smell would ask her what the smell was, and she told them she was cooking fish. Seeing as setting him on fire didn't work, she resorted in cutting him up and putting him in ice cream buckets. She even had passing strangers helping store the buckets in the freezer in the garage. I wonder, what if someone wanted ice cream and opened a bucket? You'd be caught there. Like I said before, she lacks critical thinking. One thing I can say that was critical thinking is she added cement to stop the body from decomposing. But every now and then she'd still get a smell, and since no one has caught her, she set out looking for another man. However, she didn't have to look far because Manfred returned and asked for another chance. I guess the other woman didn't have critical thinking either, so he went back to settle, in my opinion. However, after a year of no babies, Esti grows impatient again. They began to argue a lot. One day they went to dinner and Manfred happened upon an old female friend. This enrages Esti because she saw it as flirting. Manfred, not making the situation any better, made a remark by saying, "Maybe I'll have a baby with her instead." Esti wanted to talk about what he said, but he didn't want to, so he went to bed. Esti gets even more enraged, and making it even worse in her eyes was he started to snore. So Esti grabbed her gun, pointed it to his head, and she pushed his wig back. And that stopped the snoring. Much like the first husband, she cut his body up and stuffed him in ice cream buckets. November 2010. Esti has a nice collection of ice cream buckets and is still out looking for a suitor. However, she ends up having a plumbing problem, causing technicians to arrive at her shop. They smelled something unpleasant, and one worker knocked over a bucket and discovered a human leg. Esti notices this and flees to Italy. However, she was later caught and captured. She was spotted hugged up with a street minstrel. And here is one hell of a twist. Heading for life in prison for 2 cold-blooded murders. Esti is given a medical exam. Lo and behold, She was pregnant. She was 2 months pregnant by a fourth man she started dating 1 month after killing Manfred. And this is one reason why people should keep their emotions in check. Esty wanted a family so bad. However, her impatience was her downfall. Her baby is being raised by her parents in Spain because she was stripped of her freedom in 2012. And she is now shackled to prison and doomed to never raise a child. So the moral of the story is, keep your wits about you and use critical thinking. Some people, for whatever reason, lack discipline. I always find the lack of discipline astounding. Depending on the type of person you are, you can either learn discipline or fall to the waste side. Here is the story of an entitled narcissist who lacks discipline. This is the case of Amy Bishop, a woman who had the ability to do great things. However, her lack of discipline destroyed her. Without further ado, let's get on with it. Amy Bishop was 44 at the time of the shooting, also married to a man named Jimmy James Anderson and mother to 4 children. She grew up in Massachusetts, attended Braintree High School, and completed her undergraduate degree at Northeastern University in Boston, where her father, Samuel Bishop, was a professor in the art department. She earned her PhD in genetics from Harvard University. Bishop's 1993 dissertation at Harvard was titled "The Role of Methoxsatine in the Respiratory Burst of Phagocytes." Her research interests included induction of adaptive resistance to nitric oxide in the central nervous system and utilization of motor neurons for the development of neural circuits grown on biological computer chips. An anonymous source at Harvard said that Bishop's work was of poor quality and undeserving of a doctoral degree, calling it local scandal number 1. Bishop joined the faculty of UAH's Department of Biological Sciences as an assistant professor in 2003. She was teaching 5 courses before the shooting. Previously, she was an instructor at Harvard Medical School. She and her husband's portable cell incubator came in 3rd in a technology competition, winning $25,000. Prodigy Biosystems, where Anderson is employed, raised $1.25 million to develop the automated cell incubator. President David Williams considered that the incubator would change the way biological and medical research is conducted. But some scientists consulted by the press declared it unnecessary and too expensive. Bishop, a second cousin of the novelist John Irving, had written 3 unpublished novels. One featured a woman scientist working to defeat a pandemic virus and struggling with suicidal thoughts at the prospect of not earning tenure. According to an article in The New Yorker, the novels reportedly reveal a deep preoccupation with the concept of deliverance from sin. Bishop was a member of the Hamilton Writers Group while living in Ipswich, Massachusetts in the late 1990s, and was said to believe that writing would be her ticket out of academia. Members of the club said she would frequently cite her Harvard degree and family ties to Irving to boost her credential as a serious writer. Another member described her as smart but abrasive in her interactions and as feeling entitled to praise. Bishop had a literary agent but had not published any books. Several colleagues had expressed concern over Bishop's behavior. She was described as interrupting meetings with bizarre tangents, left-field kind of stuff, strange and crazy. One of these colleagues was a member of Bishop's tenure review committee. After her tenure was denied and she learned that this colleague had called her crazy. Full citation needed. Bishop filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, alleging sex discrimination, citing the professor's remark as possible evidence. The professor did not retract his comments. The professor was given the opportunity to back off the claim or to say it was a flippant remark. But he didn't. "I said she was crazy multiple times and I stand by that," the professor said. "This woman has a pattern of erratic behavior. She did things that weren't normal. She was out of touch with reality. Bishop was reportedly a poor instructor and unpopular among her students. She dismissed several graduate students from her lab, and others sought transfers out. In 2009, several UAH students said they complained to administrators about Bishop on at least 3 occasions, saying she was ineffective in the classroom and had odd, unsettling ways. A petition signed by dozens of students was sent to the department head. The complaints did not result in any classroom changes. Also, in 2009, Bishop published an article in a Vanity Press medical journal listing her husband and 3 minor children as co-authors. The article was later removed from the journal website. On December 9, 1986, Bishop, then 21 years old, fatally shot her 18-year-old brother Seth at their home in Braintree, Massachusetts. She fired 2 shots from a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun, one into her bedroom wall and one into Seth's chest. Later, she pointed the gun at a moving vehicle on the adjacent road and tried to get into the vehicle. Bishop and her mother told police the shooting had been an accident. Police found a live round in the gun's chamber, meaning that Bishop must have racked its slide after shooting her brother. After a brief inquiry into the incident by the Massachusetts State Police in 1986, they repeated the Braintree Police Department's initial assessment that the shooting was accidental. Then, Norfolk County District Attorney Bill Delahunt, later elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, did not file charges. Detailed records of the shooting had disappeared by 1988. Braintree Police Chief Paul Frazier said on February 13, 2010, "The report's gone, removed from the files." After speaking with officers involved with the case in 1986, Frazier called the accident description inaccurate. He and others said that then-Chief John Polio had ordered Bishop released to her mother Judy, who was allegedly a political supporter of the chief as a member of the Braintree town meeting. They said that Bishop had demanded to meet with Polio personally after the arrest, instead of being charged for the shooting. Frazier was not on duty during the incident, but recalled how frustrated the members of the department were over the release of Bishop. Other officers, Frazier said, believed that Polio had fixed a murder, resulting in what he described as a miscarriage of justice, just because it was a friend of his. The retired Polio denied that there had been a cover-up. Frazier's 2010 account and the 1987 Massachusetts State Police report differ in several key details, including whether Bishop had been arguing with her brother or with her father before the shooting. On February 16, 2010, Braintree officials announced that the files previously missing had been found. Then Norfolk County District Attorney Bill Keating, who was himself elected to the House of Representatives later that year to replace Delahunt, concluded that probable cause existed in 1986 to arrest and charge Bishop for crimes committed after she fled the house. She had taken the shotgun to a nearby auto dealership shop and brandished it at 2 employees in an attempt to get a car. Bishop could have been charged with assault with a dangerous weapon, carrying a dangerous weapon, and unlawful possession of ammunition. The statute of limitations had expired on these charges. The most serious charge considered in 1986 was manslaughter for the death of her brother. Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick ordered the state police to review their investigation, saying, "It is critical that we provide as clear an understanding as possible about all aspects of this case and its investigation to ensure that where mistakes were made, they are not repeated in the future." An investigation was opened in which the state cooperated with the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office to assess the handling of the case by the state, the local police, and the then district attorney. On February 25, 2010, Keating sent District Court Judge Mark Coven a letter to start a judicial inquest into the 1986 shooting. Keating said that recently enlarged crime scene photos from Bishop's bedroom reveal a news article in which a similar crime was reported. He speculated that this article may relate to Bishop's intent. Keating did not identify the specific news article, but the Boston Globe wrote that an internet search revealed that 2 weeks earlier, the parents As explained by Williams, the university president, given that Bishop had been denied tenure in March 2009, she could not expect to have her teaching contract renewed after March 2010. She appealed the decision to UAH's administration. Without reviewing the content of the tenure application, it determined that the process was carried out according to policy and denied the appeal. The routine faculty meeting at which Bishop opened fire was unrelated to her tenure. Bishop's husband said the denial of tenure had been an issue in recent months and described the tenure process as a long, basically hard fight. He said that it was his understanding that Bishop exceeded the qualifications for tenure and that she was distressed at the likelihood of losing her position barring a successful appeal. She approached members of the University of Alabama System's Board of Trustees and hired a lawyer who was finding one problem after another with the process. One point of dispute was whether 2 of her papers had been published in time to count toward tenure. Bishop, who gave more weight to obtaining patents than publishing papers, reportedly received several warnings that she needed to have more publications in order to receive tenure. Of Patrick Duffy, the actor who played Bobby Ewing on the popular television show Dallas, were killed in Montana by an assailant wielding a 12-gauge shotgun, who then held up a car dealership, stole a pickup truck, and fled. On March 1, 2010, Detective Brian Howe, the state police's lead investigator in the 1986 shooting, said he looked forward to addressing the judicial inquest and stood by his 1987 report. He had agreed with Captain Theodore Bucher, the late Braintree lead investigator, that the shooting was accidental. Howe said he was assigned to the case nearly 2 hours after the shooting and immediately called Braintree police. Bucher told him that he would not be needed that day and that Bishop had already been released into her parents' custody. Howe said that Braintree police never informed him that she had later allegedly accosted employees at a car dealership at gunpoint, demanding a car. He said that he repeatedly requested the December 6th incident reports from the Braintree police, but never received them. On March 1, 2010, Keating announced that an inquest would be held on April 13th. Judge Coven, First Justice of Quincy District Court, was scheduled to hold the inquest. During the inquest, Braintree police officers testified that Judy Bishop had asked for Polio by name before the officers were ordered to release Amy Bishop. Judy, Polio, and his wife all testified that Judy and Polio had not been friends, and Judy denied that she had asked for Polio at the station. On June 16, 2010, Amy Bishop was charged with first-degree murder in her brother's death, nearly 24 years after his shooting. Keating commented, "I can't give you any explanations, I can't give you excuses, because there are none. Jobs weren't done, responsibilities weren't met, and justice wasn't served." Bishop's parents, who claimed that the Braintree officers lied about the events at the station, issued a statement after the indictment. They wrote, "We cannot explain or even understand what happened in Alabama. However, we know that what happened 23 years ago to our son, Seth, was an accident." The protagonist of the first of Bishop's unpublished novels is a woman who, as a child, attempted to frighten a friend after an argument, but accidentally killed the friend's brother. Patrick Radden Keefe speculated after reviewing the evidence that Bishop had meant to frighten or shoot her father with the shotgun after an argument and mistook her brother for him. "I came to believe that there had indeed been a cover-up between Bishop's parents and Polio," he wrote, "but that it had been an act not of conspiracy but of compassion, a parochial gesture of mercy and denial that had an incalculable cost decades later in Alabama. This is what I mean by lack of discipline, and also the entitlement. Here is a woman who literally could have possibly done great things, but literally lacks the discipline and discernment for basic things. Also, the fact that she managed to get off scot-free after killing her brother just proves the entitlement, and her friend in a high place of authority also played a part toward the creation of said entitlement. I do feel as though he covered up a crime and not just him. The parents had a hand in it as well. All in all, I believe all 3 of them should be held accountable. Me personally, I'd love to throw knuckles at all of them for 24 hours straight." But anyway, moving on to another bizarre matter, the pipe bomb incident. In 1993, Bishop and her husband were suspected of sending 2 letter bombs which failed to explode to Paul Rosenberg, a Harvard Medical School professor. Rosenberg was Bishop's supervisor at a children's hospital neurobiology lab and had given a negative evaluation of Bishop, who resigned from her position. Bishop was afterwards said to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and her husband reportedly said that he wanted to shoot, stab, or strangle Rosenberg. The investigation was closed with no charges filed. After the Huntsville shootings, the case was reviewed, but it remains unsolved. I don't understand why she's even still free up to this point. There is something completely unstable in the mind of this woman. It's mind-blowing. This is someone that needs to be in a padded cell, stewing in her thoughts with her degree. And the fact that no one has clapped her yet is probably another reason why she continues to do shit. Some people just need a good-ass beating. But moving on to the next issue, the International House of Pancakes assault. On March 16, 2002, Bishop was involved in a fight with another customer at an IHOP restaurant in Peabody, Massachusetts. The other customer had taken the last available booster seat at the restaurant, leading Bishop to confront her. When the woman refused to give up the seat, Bishop punched her in the head while yelling, "I am Dr. Amy Bishop." Bishop pleaded guilty to assault and received probation. Prosecutors recommended that she attend anger management classes, but her husband said she never went. And I still stand by the ass beating. She needs it bad. People like this could use a good rock bottom. It seems the more she gets away with things, the more her antics escalate. I haven't even gotten to the shootings yet. Okay, here we go. On February 12, 2010, 3 people were killed and 3 others wounded in a shooting at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, UAH in Huntsville, Alabama, United States. During a routine meeting of the biology department attended by approximately 12 people, Amy Bishop, a biology professor at the university, began shooting those nearest her with a Ruger P95 handgun. Bishop was charged with 1 count of capital murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. On September 11, 2012, she pleaded guilty to the charges after family members of victims petitioned the judge against use of the death penalty. The jury heard a condensed version of the evidence on September 24th, as required by Alabama law. The same day, Bishop was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In March 2009, Bishop had been denied tenure at UAH, making spring 2010 her last semester there per university policy. Due to the attention she attracted as a result of the shooting, previous violent incidents in which Bishop had been involved or implicated were reevaluated. In 1986, Bishop had shot and killed her brother Seth in Braintree, Massachusetts, in an incident that was, at the time, officially ruled an accident. She was also questioned along with her husband, Jimmy Anderson, after a 1993 pipe bomb incident was directed at her lab supervisor. On the day of the shooting, Bishop taught her anatomy and neurosciences class at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, UAH. A student later said Bishop seemed perfectly normal during the lecture. Bishop then attended a biology department faculty meeting on the 3rd floor of the Shelby Center for Science and Technology. According to witnesses, 12 or 13 people attended the meeting, which was described as an ordinary faculty meeting. Bishop's behavior was also described as normal just before the shooting. Bishop sat quietly at the meeting for 30 to 40 minutes before pulling out a Ruger P95 9mm handgun just before 4 o'clock. A witness said that she got up suddenly, took out a gun, and started shooting at each one of us. She started with the one closest to her and went down the row shooting her targets in the head. Another survivor said, "This wasn't random shooting around the room. This was execution style." Those who were shot were on one side of the oval table. The 5 on the other side dropped to the floor. After Bishop had fired several rounds, Deborah Moriarty, a biochemistry professor, said that she pointed the gun at her and pulled the trigger, but heard only a click as her gun either jammed or ran out of ammunition. She described Bishop as initially appearing angry, then perplexed. Joseph Ung, an associate professor, said Moriarty attempted to stop Bishop by approaching her and asking her to stop, and helped the other survivors push Bishop from the room and block the door. Ung said, Moriarty was probably the one that saved our lives. She was the one that initiated the rush. The suspected murder weapon was found in a bathroom on the second floor of the science building. Bishop did not have a permit to carry a concealed weapon. She was arrested a few minutes later outside the building. Shortly after her arrest, Bishop was quoted as saying, "It didn't happen. There's no way." When asked about the deaths of her colleagues, Bishop replied, "There's no way. They're still alive." Police interviewed Bishop's husband, Jimmy Anderson, after it was determined that she had called him to pick her up after the shooting. They did not charge him. The couple were seen leaving their home with duffel bags on Friday afternoon before the shooting. Anderson said that Bishop had borrowed the gun used in the shooting and that he had escorted her to an indoor shooting range in the weeks before the incident. Shortly after Bishop's arrest, there was concern that she had booby-trapped the science building with a herpes bomb intended to spread the virus. She had worked with the herpes virus during her postdoctoral studies and had written a novel describing the spread of a virus similar to herpes throughout the world. The police had already searched the premises, finding only the murder weapon. What the hell is up with some people? A herpes bomb? Seriously? What the actual fuck is wrong with people? I should probably stop asking that question. There is no understanding the mind of a lunatic. This case is just insanely weird. And trying to act like you have no memory of what happened is insane. You arrived to a meeting, then opened fire, and shortly after that, you're brain dead? And yet you were seen with a duffel bag. This entire scenario screams well thought out and planned. I honestly have no sympathy for this woman. She shouldn't be allowed to have any air supply. But anyway, on September 24th, 2012, Bishop was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Norfolk County declined to seek her extradition. Through her Massachusetts lawyer, Bishop said she wanted to be tried for her brother's death in order to vindicate herself. She is serving her sentence at the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. As of 2020, her security classification is medium, and her residence is a dormitory instead of a cell block. After pleading guilty in September 2012 and waiving her right to appeal, Bishop filed an appeal on February 11, 2013. The appeal stated that she was not informed of the rights she would be waiving by pleading guilty, that she was not correctly informed of the minimum range of punishment, and that the circuit court failed to explain that she could withdraw her plea. On April 26, 2013, the Court of Criminal Appeals of Alabama rejected the appeal, holding that Bishop failed to challenge the validity of her guilty pleas in the circuit court and did not file either a motion to withdraw her pleas or a motion for a new trial. On April 18, 2021, Bishop's 20-year-old son, Seth Anderson, named for her late brother, was fatally shot in an unrelated incident in Huntsville. 18-year-old Vincent Johan Harmon was arrested and initially charged with reckless murder. A grand jury later reduced the charge to manslaughter. As for Amy Bishop, she is currently still serving her sentence without parole. This is one of the craziest cases I've read. There were so many court miscues, too many lenient punishments, and so many self-entitled behaviors and decisions. I'm sure some people may have seen a softer side to her, but after reading this case, I couldn't see any redeeming qualities in this woman. Even at a young age, she was a piece of shit with a degree. And I hope she is getting the mother of all ass-kickings in prison by everyone in there to the point where she's getting tossed around and has just enough teeth to chew her food on one side of her mouth. Rot in there for the rest of your pathetic life. Mental health can be a very dangerous thing if the user lacks control. The best way to separate yourself for these types is to watch behavior. And I watch behavior. However, Not all people exhibit negative behavior, but those who do can be a danger to themselves or society, and also both. Either way, some people find themselves doing unimaginable things, and it can lead to murder. Today, I'm going to cover a woman named Lauren Stewart, a woman who struggled with mental health, and because help was too late, it caused one hell of a tragedy. Without further ado, let's get on with it. Lauren Stewart and her husband Daniel were high school sweethearts who raised their two children, Stephen and Bethany, in a modest home in Michigan. Daniel worked as a technical support specialist and was a very smart guy according to resources with an IQ at 165, while Lauren did some freelance modeling and photography. Friends and neighbors described the Stewarts as quiet but kind. Lauren was noted for being deeply involved in her children's lives and attentive to their education and well-being. Her daughter Bethany went to school and received her degree in art design. Her son Stephen went to school for computer technology, and he was really gifted. But behind closed doors, the Stewart family was struggling with emotional wounds that never fully healed. For starters, the Stewart family was a House of Jehovah's Witnesses, in which case the church elders did not agree to higher education. The church opposed to the idea of college. Daniel Stewart allowed his children to attend and complete college, despite what the elders thought. For much of their lives, the Stewart family were devout Jehovah's Witnesses. However, due to the children attending college, the elders constantly belittled the Stewarts and quoted scriptures at them. Lauren and Daniel chose to leave the church, a decision that would isolate them from their community and support network. According to close friends, Lauren felt abandoned and ostracized by the congregation, and worse, by family members who were still in the faith. The Jehovah's Witnesses are known for their strict practice of shunning, cutting off contact with those who leave or are expelled from the religion. For Lauren, who had devoted most of her life to the faith, the excommunication reportedly caused intense emotional pain. She and her family were now spiritually cut off, and Lauren believed they had lost not only their religious community, but their future. It was at a point to where she felt alone, despite having her immediate family. Lauren would approach friends. However, she would be ignored, belittled, or flat-out disrespected. Lauren would try to approach other family members still in the church, but they'd run from her. This is what I dislike about religious leaders: the means to control who and however you see fit. I'm all for having a religion, but I don't understand what the big deal is about the children getting an education. I just feel that some of the religious leaders and Bible thumpers go too far. If the kids are supposed to be the future, then wouldn't it be logical to allow them to seek education? Well, anyway. In the years following their exit from the church, Lauren's mental health reportedly declined. She struggled with depression and feelings of despair. Though she tried to restart her modeling career and stayed active online, friends said she never fully recovered from the stigma and isolation brought on by being shunned. Some sources claimed Lauren feared her children would have no hope for salvation, and she believed they were spiritually dead due to their separation from the church. This distorted worldview, likely amplified by religious trauma and untreated mental illness, appeared to play a critical role in what would become a fatal unraveling. During this time, Lauren tried to reach out to her sister one last time. Ironically enough, she encountered her at a grocery store. Upon Lauren's approach, she was ignored. She wasn't considered to be family anymore after leaving the church, which brought on more despair. Lauren tried everything she could to get herself out of despair. She tried once more to jumpstart her modeling career. Although she was successful, there was still that pit of despair in her heart. She and Daniel found avenues with each other as well. The two had their family outings with their children, and even though they stopped attending church, it didn't push away their faith. However, this is when everything gets even worse. You see, upon reading her Bible, Lauren came across passages of Armageddon. Lauren, continuing to read, only scared her more and more. She started to believe Armageddon is really coming. In her head, she knew she didn't have the protection of the church to save her and her family, so ideas in her head started to stir. For some reason, Lauren, as well as Jehovah's Witnesses, believe that if you died before Armageddon, you will have a chance at paradise on earth. Lauren tried to keep the thoughts from her mind by improving herself and remodeling her house. However, 2017, she became obsessed with the end of the world, and as the thoughts continued to stir in her mind, her depression got worse and worse. Considering that she was shunned by her church, she decided to take matters into her own hands. On February 15, 2018, Lauren brings the family together one by one. Lauren, one by one, shot each and every last one of her family as they returned home. She also shot her dog as well. And this is very significant to me because in her mind, she really believed the end times were coming and she thought she was saving all lives. This is one of the most unfortunate stories I've come across. The family had very high potential to do great things, in my opinion, but her mental state of mind was completely gone. Some people can stand firm on their beliefs. However, sometimes if you don't have the rational mind to regulate these things, it can turn ugly really fast. On the morning of February 16, 2018, police were called to the Stewart home after a welfare check was requested. Inside, they found a harrowing scene. Lauren, Daniel, Stephen, and Bethany were all dead from gunshot wounds. Authorities ruled the case a murder-suicide. Lauren had shot her husband and 2 children before taking her own life. A handgun was found near her body, and there were no signs of a struggle. If only she had someone else to talk to, or if only she got the help she needed, this most unfortunate event could have been avoided. The news stunned the community. Friends described Lauren as kind, intelligent, and devoted to her family. But as more details surfaced, it became clear she had been grappling with profound inner turmoil. A family friend later said Lauren had told her, "I love my family too much to let them live without me," a chilling foreshadowing of her fatal logic. Mental health experts cited this case as an example of altruistic filicide, a phenomenon in which a parent believes they are sparing their children from suffering by ending their lives. This tragic story also highlighted the psychological harm that can stem from strict religious environments and the practice of shunning. While not the sole cause, the emotional fallout from being cut off by her former church likely contributed to Lauren's sense of hopelessness. The case of Lauren Stewart is a haunting reminder of how deeply emotional trauma, isolation, and mental illness can intertwine. Behind the facade of a serene suburban life were years of pain, rejection, and untreated mental health issues. Today, the home in Keego Harbor sits quiet, a ghost of the life that once filled it. The Stewart family's story is not just one of tragedy. It is a call to recognize the signs of psychological suffering, to question harmful religious practices, and to ensure that those who leave tightly knit faith communities are not left in the shadows. One of the most notorious serial killers in history, and still to this day his identity has eluded investors. Here is the story of the infamous killer of the Whitechapel district, Jack the Ripper. Although the public became fascinated by these killings, they've also begun to grow impatient due to the lack of information regarding the identity of this relentless madman. However, it wasn't just the public eye who had grown impatient. Due to the lack of evidence to identify the madman, it frustrated the police to the point of the police commissioner and home secretary resigning. We're going to cover the 5 canonical victims and possible suspects that police believe could have been Jack the Ripper, counting as many as 8 possible suspects. Without further ado, let's jump into the timeline. In the year 1888, the East End of London, also known as the Whitechapel district, was said to be one of the rundown places in London where the prostitutes made their living. However, what was usually an ordinary day was soon enveloped with fear when a madman with no clear motive terrorized the streets with fear. That man will later be known as Jack the Ripper. In August 31st, 1888, at 3 in the morning, the body of Mary Ann Nichols was found on Bucks Row in Whitechapel by two men, Charles Cross and Robert Paul. They claimed to have noticed a bundle on the western end. The police would eventually arrive on the scene. Upon further review, Mary Ann's throat was severely slashed and she was disemboweled. It was determined that she had been dead for half an hour, although I have no clue how they were able to determine a time of death back in that time. The police managed it just fine, keeping that in mind. The killer was still very close by, probably watching them. On September 8, 1888, the body of Annie Chapman was discovered on Hainbury Street by a man named John Davis, a resident on 29 Hainbury Street. Her throat was also cut. And also things got a bit worse for the poor lady because the murderer took her womb. Dr. George Phillips, who had been on the case, had determined the killer had anatomical knowledge based on how the womb was removed from Annie Chapman, meaning the killer was possibly a doctor like himself. And to add insult to injury, Jack the Ripper wrote a letter to the police, taunting them and thanking them for the nickname, also revealing to the police that he loves his work and he wants to start again, ending the taunt with a laugh and asking how can he be caught. In other words, catch me if you can. Thank goodness there was no social media back then. Who knows how far this little game of cat and mouse would have gone. Soon after that, 3 days later, on September 30th, 1888, the body of Elizabeth Stride was discovered on Berner Street by a man named Louis Diemschutz. Only her throat was cut, which led police to believe Jack the Ripper was interrupted by Louis approaching, due to her not being as severely damaged as the last two victims. It was determined that she was dead for 30 minutes, and soon after that, 45 minutes later, another body was discovered during this investigation just west of Stride's body at Minor Square. A woman named Catherine Eddowes was found literally 45 minutes after Stride, which means Jack the Ripper not only had knowledge of the area, but was still on the loose, circling around the police swiftly and watching their every move. Catherine's body was severely mutilated, including her face. Her uterus was removed as well as her left kidney. A clue was left behind. It was a piece of Catherine's apron, and on it was another clue from Jack the Ripper. Now this is crucial because the apron was found in the middle of murders shortly after Catherine's murder, indicating Jack the Ripper managed to enter the area swarming with police. A postcard was later received by the police from someone claiming to be Jack the Ripper on October 1st. Apparently, the letter was received the morning after the double event. The details in the postcard described both murders from cover to cover, and also thanking the police once more for letting him continue his work. Based on the handwriting and the details of the postcard, the police realized this was in fact the real Jack the Ripper, considering the police had not released any information to the public about the double murders. I say real because he earned such a name for himself that people pretended to be him during this time. On October 13th, 1888, the police searched every house for a week but uncovered no evidence of Jack the Ripper. On October 16th, a man named George Lusk, who was the head of the Mile End Vigilant Committee, who assists the police, received a letter called From Hell. The letter also had a box delivered with it with half a human kidney, who some believed it belonged to Catherine. However, upon investigation, police found out the From Hell letter was a prank from a medical student and the kidney was fake. However, on November 9th, 1888, the body of the fifth victim, Mary Kelly, was found. This body was by far the worst of them all. Her body was not only disemboweled, it was virtually skinned alive. The landlord described it as the devil's work. With that being said, it's time to name our suspects. Sir Melville Macnaughton had a general suspicion as to who the killer might be. The first suspect was Montague Johnson Druitt. Apparently, he wanted to be a surgeon and had a cousin that practiced medicine in the Whitechapel. Although it is said that he could have been Jack, Montague disappeared and later was found floating in the Thames River 4 weeks after the last murder. The second suspect was a man by the name of Michael Ostrog, a Russian doctor and a criminal. Ostrog had been in an asylum for homicidal tendencies. Macnaughton notes that Ostrog couldn't provide a solid alibi for his whereabouts during the murders. Ultimately, he was not convicted due to lack of evidence. The third suspect was a man named Aaron Kosminski, a Polish resident in the Whitechapel. He also spent time in an asylum in 1889 after the last murder. Kosminski would stay there until his death in 1919. Kosminski was known for his hatred of women, particularly prostitutes. According to Macnaughton, he fit the description given by people in Mitre Square, which was the same night of the double murders. Kosminski was familiar due to his name being in a book called Naming Jack the Ripper. Apparently, a shawl was purchased at a shop with DNA belonging to Kosminski. This is crucial because it's the same shawl, or rather a piece of it that was left at the scene of Catherine Eddowes. Also, there was semen found on the shawl that apparently belonged to one of the relatives of Eddowes. However, the researchers made an error of nomenclature. Basically, Dr. Jari Louhelainen, a molecular biologist, identified a mutation in DNA on both the Scarf and Eddowes relative named Karen Miller. This mutation was named 3114.1C, only found in one person out of 290,000 people. However, that's where the error was made. The real number was actually 315.1C, which according to researchers is a mutation shared by 99% of Europeans. Putting it simple, the research was useless. Seeing as the doctor made an error with his research, the investigation team threw out whatever else he may have found. The fourth suspect, with a pretty bizarre theory, was Jack the Ripper could in fact be female, calling her Jill the Ripper, which to some, it may explain why the killer had always been able to slip through the cracks undetected. Although some still believed it possible for the killer to be female due to the fact that a midwife with blood on their clothes would be easily explained, it still doesn't fit the public eye's description of the killer being a male. The fifth suspect was Prince Albert Victor Christian Edward, aka the Royal Conspiracy. Prince Albert would be seen walking around where the victims were found. He later contracted syphilis, which some believe it drove him insane. Some say he had a child with a local woman, and Queen Victoria ruled against this and had the woman silenced. Conspiracy theorists also believe he was never discovered due to the royal aid assisting in a cover-up. However, the theory fell to the ground due to lack of evidence or DNA matching the prince. The sixth suspect was a painter by the name Walter Sickert, a theory posed by a woman named Patricia Cornwell, who was a crime novelist. Cornwell spent £2 million on Sickert's paintings, letters, and writing desk in order to comb over them and prove he was Jack the Ripper. Cornwell believes Sickert was Jack the Ripper due to his obsession with Jack the Ripper and his victims. Cornwell happened upon unusual painting of the victims designed by Sickert, so she dedicated her research squarely on him. Furthermore, it is said that Sickert was so obsessed to the point of cosplaying as Jack the Ripper. But nevertheless, these were all harmless. All it did was show Sickert as an obsessed man rather than a killer. The seventh suspect is a man named Joseph Barnett. In this case, Barnett actually lived with the final victim, Mary Kelly. In fact, Barnett lived in 10 different locations in East London. A lot of conspiracy theorists believed he was the killer for this reason, which can easily explain how the killer was able to get around town so swiftly undetected. Barnett was also a fish porter and was said to be in love with Mary Kelly. According to sources, he referred to Kelly as his wife, even though they were just roommates. Furthermore, Barnett would work harder, so Kelly wouldn't spend her life as a prostitute. Some believe Barnett committed the first murders to scare Kelly off the street. Even though it worked for a time, Kelly resumed her life as a prostitute, in which case Barnett disagreed. One night, the two had a huge argument and, upon discover, Kelly was found dead. Barnett was questioned but set free even though Kelly was killed in her sleep and her clothes were still folded by her bed. Furthermore, Barnett also fits the description of Jack the Ripper. And finally, it is noted that the killing stopped after the death of Mary Kelly. The eighth and final suspect, and to some the most popular, is a man named James May Brick, an upper-class cotton merchant who lived in an estate called the Battle Crease House. The reason for this suspect being Jack the Ripper is due to a diary left under the floorboards of May Brick's estate. The diary is a confession of Jack the Ripper describing the murders in detail. However, the person who discovered the diary, a man named Mike Barrett, admitted to fabricating the diary, but only to recant his statement later. Following this discovery, a pocket watch was also discovered, with not only the victims' names. It was also signed by Jack the Ripper and James May Brick. It is said that Jack the Ripper actually claimed the lives of 11 women, not 5. Nevertheless, no one knows why he targeted prostitutes the way he did. No one will ever know. For over 100 years, the theory of Jack the Ripper's identity has continued to ripple the communities with fascination. However, the story actually doesn't end there. In the current modern times where technology has evolved, scientists and investigators made a very recent discovery in 2025. According to new research, DNA was ran through the new database and microscopes, and Jack the Ripper's identity has finally been revealed. Recent claims of a DNA match linking the killer to one Aaron Kosminski. If this is in fact true, I wish I could only see the poor doctor's face and tell him he was right all along. Infatuation can be another dangerous thing. Some people can mistake infatuation for love, and when these things are melded together, it can lead to temptations that become uncontrollable. Today I'm going to cover a woman named Sierra Harp, a woman who became so infatuated with someone, and because the feelings were not returned, it resulted in a tragic ending. Without further ado, let's get on with it. At the age of 24, Chiara was a nightclub promoter determined to make a name for herself. She was very good at her job, and she enjoyed doing the job because it provided her the independence she craved. However, even as a nightclub promoter, there was still something missing in her life, and one night she realized what it was, or rather, who it was. During one of her usual nightclub promotions, she meets a young up-and-coming rapper named Raheem Grant. Starstruck and fascinated with Raheem, she was determined to have him all to herself, to the point of telling a friend of hers she intends to make him her next baby daddy. Oh my gosh, here we go. Why is that the very first thing some women go to? Not to say men don't have a weak agenda in some cases as well, but I find it hilariously weak to appeal to the use of sex in order to tie down a person that you want, instead of allowing the person to see the good in you. Resorting to tie down a person is not a way to keep a person willingly. During this event, Ciara introduced herself as the nightclub promoter, and the reason why the events at the nightclub happen. Intrigued by her work ethic, Raheem gave her a job as his promoter for his gigs, and she was very good at it. Before long, Raheem began to make an even bigger name for himself due to the promotions by Ciara. The two became business partners and both became good friends due to the long hours worked at the music studios, working together and networking. Rahim was well known for his fashion statements during the events. He would arrive wearing designer shoes, design clothes, and 2 long braids. This was something that Ciara was also fascinated by, and she also felt that she was a part of something big for the first time of her life. As she became more and more starstruck, she became more obsessed with Rahim and his world. Ciara found herself in love with Rahim. However, it was a one-sided affair. Rahim only looked at her as a friend and would refer to her as his homegirl. Needless to say, this didn't sit well with Ciara, and as such, she was determined to change his mind. Ciara began to get more delusional to the point of her pretending the two were a couple. She began to believe her own lies, and even going so far as telling people they were actually together. Ciara tried whatever she could to get Rahim's attention, but Rahim wasn't interested in her. No matter how she'd dress or flirt with him, he only looked at her as a friend. Even though he let her know these things, she still tried to keep other women away from him. Good grief. This is delusion at its finest. A normal person, in my opinion, would have just kept it moving, and this is one reason why humanity has its struggles. Some people just lack the ability to separate fantasy, fiction, and reality, and because of this, the lack of control of feelings take over. Ciara sets a plan to trap Rahim, since he wasn't interested in a relationship with her. She figured she'd just make sure to keep Rahim in her life in a different way. 2 months after meeting Rahim, the two decided to have a celebration one night due to a contract Rahim landed. This will go on to be crucial because Ciara set her trap in motion. She spiked his drink with a drug, making him extremely drowsy. By doing this, she proceeded to have relations with him. Rahim was so drowsy to the point of not even remembering the two being intimate. Wow, this is just horrible. This is flat out grape, and in her limited mind, she figured if he became her baby's dad, then it's possible to be his wife. This is some crazy shit. Now, if the situation were reversed, this man would be looking at penalties, jail time, and all sorts of things. Goes to show you how screwed up things are in society. Anyway, Ciara ends up getting pregnant and informs Rahim. He doesn't believe her due to not being able to remember the night in question. Several months down the line, Ciara has a baby girl and also presents DNA proof to Rahim, proving he's the father. After showing him proof, she still had the delusion of the two of them being husband and wife. However, once again, her plan backfires. Rahim is furious at her for setting him up. The baby didn't change the situation in the least. He wanted to be a father without being in a relationship with Ciara. After hearing this from Rahim, Ciara became angry. 3 weeks after having the baby, she abandons the child by leaving her with Rahim. Wow, this woman is garbage truck juice. And that poor child was only born for the sole purpose of living out a fantasy that was in her head, and when it didn't work, the poor child was just collateral damage in her eyes. However, Rahim didn't look at the child as collateral. He wanted to be a good dad. He files for full custody. Ciara decides to be spiteful and objects to Rahim wanting full custody and doesn't consent. According to sources, in the state of Georgia, an unwed father has no rights to the child, which is dumb as hell. And Ciara knew this, which is why she declined his rights to have custody. My goodness, I despise spiteful bitches. She decided to use the baby as a pawn to stay in Rahim's life. However, life doesn't work out for Ciara. She falls on hard times after losing her job. She became homeless. Knowing this, Rahim does the ultimate kindness and also a favor to himself as an empathetic father by allowing both Ciara and his child to come live with him. The delusions began to come back for Ciara. She began to believe once more that she and Rahim can be a couple. However, Rahim wasn't interested in a relationship in the least. Rahim vocally voiced this to her, in which case it infuriates her. She became unstable once more, and the two began to argue frequently. On December 29, 2017, Rahim and his personal trainer were hanging out. Sierra was upset that his trainer was a woman, so she decided to ruin the good time the two were having by starting another argument. The personal trainer decided to leave after feeling uncomfortable. Even after she left, Sierra and Rahim continued to argue to the point where it got physical. I say physical only due to Sierra attacking him. Rahim decided to get on his phone and go live, showing the world his wounds from Sierra attacking him. The live feed managed to show him bleeding. However, this didn't stop Sierra from arguing with him live. Rahim looks at the camera and says, "You see what this bitch did to me? This is what Sierra Harp did to me." This ignites Sierra to the point to where she pulled out a gun. And by the time Rahim realized this, she had already fired the first shot, hitting him in his spine. Rahim falls to the floor as she continues to shoot him. Clinging to life, he tries to reason with Sierra by telling her if she kills him, she'll go to jail for life, and not to do this to their child. However, Sierra doesn't listen as she shoots him again. Realizing this is his final moments, Rahim crawls toward his daughter, but he was sadly interrupted due to Sierra shooting him one last time, ending his life. This is so sad and cringy. The whole thing stuns the onlookers considering the whole event was live. Sierra stupidly decided to use the live as a woman-scorned excuse. She shuts the camera off afterwards and came up with one of the dumbest master plans. She stabs her legs several times to implicate Rahim as the culprit. Afterwards, she grabs her child and stumbles to her neighbor's house. Her neighbor contacts the police and the paramedics. After being bandaged up, Sierra spoke to the police. For a moment, her self-defense statement worked until the police managed to get footage of the live feed made by Rahim, and a shocking discovery was made. Not only was the incident captured and posted live, the police noticed she had no stab wounds to her legs in the video. After confronting her, she still sticks with self-defense until the police pressed play on the video, indicating Rahim could not have stabbed her. With no defense, she remained quiet. She was arrested immediately after. In 2019, Sierra Harp was convicted of 5 counts of aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during a crime, and voluntary manslaughter. She is sentenced to 125 years in prison. This is one of the saddest cases I've come across. This stupid woman could not separate her fantasy world and couldn't stand to see it collapse. I'm glad justice was served for Rahim. However, there was no real winner here. Another child was left on this earth without parents due to selfishness. Ladies and gentlemen, please learn to control your emotions. And please consider not just your life, consider your children and family and what you'll be leaving behind. Today I'm going to take a detour and tell a story regarding a different encounter. One of the most horrifying or worst encounters that we humans can experience. This story is not a murder mystery, but something just as, or even more terrifying. This is a supernatural encounter, and without further ado, let's get to it. Back in the early 90s, where technology wasn't as grand as it is in today's society, people usually had other avenues of entertainment such as malls, video arcades, blockbuster videos, and all sorts of other things. Not to say some of these things don't exist in today's society. However, during the early 90s to the early 2000s, things were a lot simpler and more fun, in my opinion. And it was also a time where children were able to go outside and play until the streetlights came on. This child was no exception to the fun. However, when this child wasn't out playing with friends, he was an avid video game player, which was his absolute favorite pastime activity. He didn't have a brother to hang out with. He was surrounded by girls with no father and just his mother. So, for him, he'd play his video game more frequently when he wasn't outside, because that was his source of entertainment at home. Well, anyway, one day the family moved into a big house. Everyone was excited because it was way bigger than the apartment they moved from. The house had a big front and backyard, and the family dog they had was also able to run around and have fun. However, the fun was short-lived because little by little the young boy and his sisters began to experience unexplainable noises at night. Sometimes the floorboards would creak as if someone was walking down the hallway. The children would ask their mother if she heard the noise. However, the mother didn't hear anything. In fact, the mother would often accuse them of making things up in order to stay awake late. Whatever the case, the children would often go to bed frightened by the constant noise. As for the young boy, he would often try to ignore the noise, considering his room was the room furthest away. And unlike his sisters, he didn't share his room with anyone. So he'd either sleep with the door closed until he was told not to by his mother, or he would have the family dog with him. And over time, it seemed to be working. However, whenever the little boy would get up to use the restroom or go to the kitchen to get a snack, he would often get chills down his spine, and he would always feel like there were eyes on him. However, he would see no one around. But it didn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It got to the point where the children enjoyed being at school rather than being at home, because they would be amongst friends. The little boy in particular would tell his friend about the feeling he'd get when he was alone in the house. However, his friend didn't understand the gravity behind it, because he didn't believe in ghosts. Or maybe by explaining it as such, it was a way to keep the little boy from thinking about it himself. Nevertheless, the little boy would eventually forget all about the experiences at the house when he was at school or out with friends. One day, the little boy was getting off the school bus in front of the house, and he spotted someone staring at him from the window. The little boy ignored what he saw and figured it was probably a friend of his mother. However, upon getting on the porch, there was a note on the doormat from his mother letting him know that she had stepped out and to retrieve the key underneath the mat in the backyard. After reading this, the boy began to wonder if someone had broke in the house. So he went back to get his sisters, and they went to their neighbor's house and waited there until their mother returned home. However, that got him in trouble by his mother for ignoring her instructions. He tried to explain what happened, but his mother was so upset that she didn't hear anything he was saying due to her constant yelling. Little by little, the little boy felt more and more demoralized. He'd often talk to his little sisters as well, and they too felt the same way. It was to a point where the children didn't want to be in that house. The little boy decided to spend a large amount of his time in the little back house in the backyard. Every day, he and the family dog would go to the back house and play the video game there instead of the actual house. However, he'd head back to the main house before it became too dark to navigate through the yard. He'd even be scolded if he wasn't back before dark. Day in and day out, he made that his routine, and he would often feel the coldness and chills the moment he set foot in the main house. The little boy tried to talk with his mother about the house again and again, but it often fell on deaf ears. His mother would often say he was over-exaggerating. More to that, his mother was a party woman, so she'd often be gone, and the little boy and his sisters would be home alone. And as long as they would have each other, or the little boy had his video game, it was enough to ignore these unexplainable noises. However, one day, as the little boy was in the back house, the lights went out. Apparently, his mother didn't pay the electric bill. This made the child even more afraid at night. The lights were out for a significant amount of time, so the kids would often walk around with candles. However, the little boy would try not to leave his room at night, because sometimes it was hard to find a lighter and he couldn't navigate through the dark. The nighttime was so terrifying to him and his sisters, and the situation got even worse because during the night silence, the children were able to hear not only sounds of someone walking around, they also began to hear voices. The little boy would often sit up in his bed due to hearing the voices, but he still tried to ignore it. And even though there was no electricity in the house, the little boy had a handheld Game Boy, so he would often play with that as long as he had batteries for it. However, one night as he was playing his game, the most terrifying thing happened. Right beside him, he heard a whisper directly in his ear. "Get out of my house, now." The little boy jumped and looked behind him. However, he knew it was impossible for someone to be behind him, considering he had his back against the wall. And as he turned forward, he saw something definitely inhuman in front of the doorway. Feeling pinned in his room, the little boy was so scared, but for some reason was unable to scream. And just as quick as the figure appeared, it vanished. Directly after that, the little boy ran to his mother's room and told his mother of the horrifying encounter. The mother had him stay in the room with her. However, she believed the little boy had a bad dream and was still unable to grasp the gravity of the situation. However, the next day, the little boy told his sisters about the encounter. His sisters stayed silent, but it was not the silence of disbelief. They looked relieved. One of his sisters began telling him of her encounters as well. The little boy felt a bit relieved because at least he knew he wasn't going crazy. But he also began to feel hopelessness because he had no way to combat whatever this was terrifying his family. But what he did do was walk with his sisters when they'd go to the bathroom, and he'd make sure they made it to their room. He gave his sisters relief by putting on a brave face. Little did they know he himself was terrified. However, he also began to notice the family dog growling and barking at shadows. The little boy decided to put the dog in the room with him, and over time the activity would go away. However, this was just temporary. One night, as the little boy was brushing his teeth, he began to hear sounds of nails against the wall. The little boy finished up in a hurry and ran to his room and got in bed. However, even in his room he began to hear more and more sounds, and this time it would come from his closet. Suddenly the door flew open, and once again he witnessed another terrifying sight. He was not the only witness. The dog began growling at the closet, and much like the first time, the noise stopped. The next day, his sisters asked him about the noise they heard, and he dismissed it as if it was nothing. However, his sisters knew something was up, and he was just not explaining it. Nevertheless, the sisters decided to let it go and head outside to play. The little boy did the same. However, things only got worse because the phenomenon began to show itself more and more, and the kids got to a point where they'd just sit in silence or in horror, and telling their mom didn't do anything. Although she had began to hear them out more and more, it still didn't help because she spent a lot of time out of the house, and the children would be left to care for themselves. And even more, the lights were still not back on yet, so the children still walked around the house holding a candle. However, a week later, that changed. The mother paid the bill and the lights were restored. However, soon after that, a tragedy struck. The family dog was found unresponsive and had suddenly passed away. The family was devastated, and making it worse, the spooky activity began to increase once more. One day, as the sisters were watching TV, they began to hear noises, as if someone with heavy boots were walking around. The two sisters got up and ran to their brother's room and stayed there until the noise stopped. And later that night, the little boy was sitting in his room, and suddenly he heard a whisper much like the first time.
"You need to leave. Leave, or it will get you. Go to the study room."
Although the little boy was scared, he remained calm because he had began to just deal with the noises and the strange activity. And the little boy had no idea where the study room was, so he simply ignored him, put the covers over his head, and went to bed. However, the next day, the little boy decided to return to the back house and play video games. However, when he got there, he came across what appeared to be a person. The little boy stopped and remained shocked, and soon after he realized to himself, "This must be the person whispering to me." And as the little boy looked at the person sitting in the chair, he started to recall what the voice was saying, and upon remembering, he realized this was in fact a spirit. Just then it spoke.
"You and your family should leave before it comes back."
Not knowing what it meant, the little boy went back to the main house. He knew that telling his sisters would only scare them, and he also knew his mother wouldn't believe him. And as he got in his room, he turned around and saw something else, and what he saw was an image he'd never forget. Smiling at him from his closet was a dark and sinister figure looking directly at him. And then he realized, this is what the old man's spirit was talking about. The little boy realized the old spirit wasn't trying to scare him. It was trying to warn him of something else lurking around the house. This thing was more than likely the shadow figure the family dog would growl at. And upon thinking about the dog, something else happened. The little boy's fear went away, and while standing there confronting the entity, the little boy began to feel uncomfortable rage, realizing this thing is the reason the family dog suddenly died. For 2 more minutes, there was a standoff stare between the entity and the little boy. And slowly the entity began to disappear. And from that day, the little boy stayed in that anger. And as he stayed in his anger, he experienced crazy things less and less. However, he decided not to tell his sisters anything. Instead, whenever his sisters would experience unexplainable things, he'd be there to protect them. About a week later, the mother came with some good news. She had found another house, and it was time to pack and move once more. The children were overjoyed of the news. It wasn't that the mother didn't care about what the children were saying. She had been house searching to get out of that house. It seems as though the mother experienced things herself, but didn't want to say it. On the day of the move, the boy decided to go talk to the old spirit one last time. However, when he got to the back house, he began to speak to the old spirit. But the old spirit looked at him and its appearance changed. The boy realized this was not the same spirit. This was the evil one in his closet. However, the boy held his ground, and as angry as he was, he heard a voice. It was the voice of one of his sisters looking for him and telling him it's time to get in the car and leave. And as she found him, she spotted what he was looking at. The girl was terrified by what she saw, and in that moment it began to rage at them. However, the boy wasn't leaving without his bag containing his video game, so he grabbed his bag and he and his sister ran from the back house. The two went back to the main house and took their remaining belongings and put them in the moving truck and joined their mother. Afterwards, the family drove away, leaving that dark house without looking back. As the family left to start a new adventure, the boy felt stronger after encountering something so vile, and periodically he would wonder what became of the old spirit and if another family inhabited the house. And if there is, he'd wish them well. As a word of advice, be strong in your most vulnerable state, because even though things get tough, there is always a way to overcome fear. And if you can't, we all understand. Now, I don't know what became of the old spirit in the house. Maybe the vile spirit did something to it, or maybe the old man found peace after being able to warn the little boy. And as far as the evil spirit, I just hope whatever family moves in has the strength to stand their ground against it. Either way, just be careful, because you never know when it might come back